the Wild West.
My name is Alan Armstrong from Castle Dome City. I went down this mine, and my friends, it's a 150-foot vertical, and then it goes into a tunnel. And I was walking down the drift, and I was by myself, and it was very quiet and very dark, and I had a flashlight, and it was like, how would you like to have this mine? It's like the Lord spoke to me, and I said, I would like to have this. I believe in providence. This place was meant to be. A lot of people used to get Castle Dome Landing and Castle Dome City kind of mixed up. But Castle Dome City is where the mines were, and Castle Dome Landing is where the riverboats came. And then what they do is they'd go through Port Isabella, and it would take about 23 days to get from San Francisco to here. Everything pretty much came from San Francisco. That was a hardware store. So what would happen is the riverboats would come in with all their supplies, and they would park at Castle Dome Landing, and this is where everything was staged. There was a post office, there was about 1,000 people living there, and by 1905 there was even a baseball field. And from here they would take the ore up the trails, and they would end up at the mines, which was about an 18-mile journey. And in 1875 they built the largest wagons in the world to accomplish this. And these wagons would haul 40,000 pounds or 20 tons. And they were bigger than the borax wagons in Death Valley, and they'd take at least 40 animals, mules and horses to pull this load. And by 1878, Castle Dome was larger than Yuma. Had about 3,500 people here. This was actually one of the best poor man's mining camp in the world, for real. What I mean by that is the infrastructure was here. The ore was in place, and then the big mining company, Castle Dome Mining and Smelting Company, left in about 1878. So when they left, you still had the steamboats, you still had the ore was 40 ounces per ton silver, and they got paid in advance. They didn't have to have it assayed. So it became known as one of the best grubstake mining camps in the world. Because see, you could come here and you could work and you could make money as a small guy. You didn't have to be a large company with waiting 2 or 3 months to get the assay on how much this ore was and how much it was in this mine over here, because it was all the same for 7 miles. So it was a unique opportunity for the average man to make a decent living. The way they used to do things a lot was they would recycle every piece of wood in every box. They would build cabinets, they would build chests or drawers, or they would use them for siding, and so nothing was wasted because they'd get everything was shipped in wood. And these are old cantaloupe, and they're local cantaloupe and local produce. This is the primitive stuff that was left behind, outside. Most of the stuff was outside. And that number 4 crock was kind of neat because we were able to find every piece. It'd fallen down on the desert pavement and broken, but every piece was there, as you can see. We glued it back together. It's like putting a big puzzle together. When we'd go underground, these Napopo coffee bags would be there, and they didn't waste a thing, so they'd have a shipment of coffee come in here, and these bags are 70, 80 years old, and or more. Some of them are 100 years old, and you can see how well preserved they were. They used them up, and then they had sugar cane, they had coffee. The can lids here are baking powder and coffee. That's 1880, and you can see the big solder spot on top of the can, because they would use lead solder to and that's an 1880 can with a label on it. That's kind of unusual to find. One day, my sister had sent me a little thing that said, oldest Levi's in the world found. And I said, I got that pair. They were Levi Strauss pair of pants, and they were dated 1890 to 1900. And they're some of the oldest pair in the world. There's 5 pairs in that vintage. And Levi Strauss authenticated the date on those. Similar pair sold for $45,000. This shirt right here is about 1880. And we found it in some of the old workings, and you can see the old buttons. No, I'm not sure what the brand is, but you can see the blood splatter on the shirt. A lot of the women figures in Castle Dome seem to be more enduring because the men would come and go, but like Eliza DeLuce, she was here 45 years. She had a couple hundred men, and she'd walk down the fault, and she knew the ore was in the fault. She'd say, dig here. This is a Flora Temple vein, and the vein just runs right along here on a straight line. This is about a 70-degree incline. You can see the incline goes right in like the ladder. This goes 155 feet. And if you drop down a shaft right here, you can end up all the way over by the base of that hill. And there's about 30 shafts right here, just one right after another. And you can kind of get a sense of some serious mining happened here when you look out over the landscape. They had 100-ton, 150-ton a day capacity. They got 5,000 tons out of this hole by 1878. 200,000 ounces of silver came out of this one hole. And so they built these wagons that would haul over 40,000 pounds of ore. It would take 40 horses or 40 mules to pull one wagon at least. Here's a 250-pound chunk of galena. See, if you took and broke this in half, you'd have really lustrous galena. It would look like a silver dollar. And see, this thing weighs 250 pounds. You can rock it on the table, but it weighs 250 pounds. And so, see, if you put this kind of ore concentrated in that wagon, you could see how it would add up really fast. We high-graded some ore. And this is a 250-pound brick. You have to add 2,000 degrees in a blast furnace. You have to grind the ore to powder, then you put it in a blast furnace at 2,000 degrees. And then you add potash, potassium, borax, and whole wheat flour. And the proportions have to be exact or it'll burn up, and you leave it there for 20 minutes. He was really into making the biggest brick in the world. So he did the research and he came up with 250 pounds, so there it is. Lots of men died in these holes in the early days. It wouldn't take a lot for this to cave. And in those days there was no attempt of rescue. They buried them in gunny sacks, no coffins. So no clothing, no tools, no nothing. All these dugouts made a semicircle around here, and they were to fortify and to protect themselves. And right here is a horse wind. What the horse would do is walk around circles, and it would be like a power takeoff, and he could run his ore bucket up and down in the mine. And they could move up to 10 tons a day with one horse. Yeah, this is a Jumbo J, sputters they called them. And they were used to drill wells mostly. And this was out on the north side of the refuge. They were going to clean this up, and they said, "You have 2 weeks, Alan." I said, "I want it. I'd like to have that. I think it'd be great." And they said, "You got 2 weeks." And so I started looking for contractors who could move it. And they weren't biting. They didn't want to look at it. They wanted months' notice, and I said, "I got to get this thing moved quick. How much is it going to cost? What do we got to do?" The base was open, so I drove in there, went to the commander's office, walked upstairs, knocked on the door, and they said, "How can we help you?" And I said, "I got a job for you." 2 weeks later, this thing was sitting here. This is Adam's cabin. Adam's cabin was originally built around the turn of the century, but this is the cabin that Adam lived in around the turn of the century, and this is pretty much a typical mining cabin for an individual prospector. And Adam lived in this cabin for about 25 years. Sometimes they would move underground about 20 to 30 feet, because the underground would be about 85 in the summer and 80 in the winter. So, 85 degrees is a lot better than 120. Well, there was a man named Colonel Snively, and he's considered Arizona's first citizen. And he discovered the first ore strikes in the state of Arizona before it was even a state. He followed the old blazes on the saguaros and the old worn trails, and he ended up at Castle Dome City, which was about 20 miles north of Gila City. And what he found there was pretty interesting. He found an old mining camp that was abandoned. The Spanish had extensively mined Castle Dome in the late 1600s, and what they had done is they had left in a hurry because the Indians had killed all the Spanish. General Sherman in the 1870s says, "Well, we had a war with Mexico so that they would, so we could get this country. We should have another war so they'll take back Arizona," because it was such a desolate place. But after Colonel Snively discovered these ore strikes, Arizona was a keeper. And see there, Cooper and Woods, but that was a local brewery in Yuma, and these bottles they're like improved pommel, and they're like 1860 about. And one day I was digging around in the dump on the floor of Temple 9, and in the solid rocks was this basket. Well, what happened here is when we first got here with a graveyard, and we weren't too sure if it was really a graveyard, so we exhumed one to see. What we did is they're about up to your knees deep, and so we laid a blanket out, carefully exhumed it to see if it was actually a grave. And the one we exhumed turned out to be, it was his head. What happened to him? And was it during the Apache Wars, the retaliation for when the Apache chief was taken captive? Was it a horrific mining accident, or was it a superstition? It's one of Castle Dome's mystery, but his head never went in the ground. There's about 17 graves over there. What's fascinating about Castle Dome is how the ingenuity of the people and how they would use things that today we wouldn't even have a thought of reusing, like this bucket here. I mean, you can see they put some cloth in here and they wired it up, and so nothing really ever died. Like this is an original water bag from the 1860s. I found it on the drift of the oldest working in Castle Dome. And here's a rake, a mucking rake, and you can see they got square nails drove in here and they wire wrapped it. This is how they were mucking the ore out of a drift and then collecting it, and then they'd set it in these ore buckets, and then they had these little hand cars like this. These little hand cars that they would push in the tracks in the mines. In 1872, you had a federal mining law. And see, so before the federal mining law, a district like this would get together. Castle Dome had its own constitution for mining laws, which makes it very fascinating. If you were attacked by an Indian or lack of water, you wouldn't forfeit your claim. A neat story happened here. There was a lady named Carmelita Mayhew, and she came through here around 1902 on a stagecoach. And she was very beautiful, and there was a guy named Felix Mayhew, and Felix Mayhew had just sold the North Star mine for about $250,000 around 1903. And she wowed him. And so they got together. And then what she did is she came back to Castle Dome a number of years later. And she had a brothel here. And this is her story, and her place is in here. Carmelita Romero was her original name, and then it became Carmelita Mayhew when she married him. And this guy, after he sold the mine, he would rent a train from here to San Diego and have the whole train to himself, and he'd light his cigars with $50 bills. He thought his money would never end. Yeah, he went bankrupt, and he used to sit around in Carmelita's bar. Carmelita eventually went to Yuma, and she had a bar, and he'd sit in the corner of the bar, all depressed. And then we went and found her grave. It's kind of neat. It's well kept. And then when some lady was here, and she said, yeah, when she was in the nursing home, she died about 1978. When she was in the nursing home, she used to call out for somebody. In the 30s, when she was out here, she would hire illegals. And then what she would do is right before payday, she'd call the feds. So she never had to pay her workers.
My name is Mary Lou. I'm a volunteer here. I am dressed as Carmelita Mayhew today, and I would like to tell you the story of these people here in the cantina. Well, one afternoon, this dark stranger down here rode into Castle Dome City. Came from Tombstone, is what they tell me. So that evening when the dark stranger stepped into the cantina, and the stranger yelled out, Juan, what are you doing with Rosita? She is my woman. You get away from my girl. The next thing you know, pistols were pulled and shots were fired. Oh, Juan Lagos lying dead on the cantina floor. And that happened in Castle Dome City in 1901. If you go to the cemetery, you'll find Juan Lagos' grave over there.
There was a shooting, January 28th, 1898. Barbaro Hernandez fired down a mine shaft at Francisco Gutierrez. And so they had a discussion, and then they were sitting around a table, and then things got out of hand, and the guy opened fire with a shotgun. Nobody was killed at point blank range. It's hard to believe in it. And the judge came out here, and they said that one of the guys had been smoking marijuana. This is back in 1898. He had been smoking marijuana and said they had taken his windlass. We're in the hotel, original staircase, square nails, original wainscot bar, original linoleum, original flooring, and original tin ceilings. If you went from Yuma to Prescott, you'd stop at Castle Dome City. And it would take you 52 hours to take a stagecoach, so the stage would stop here, where you could have a cheap meal and wait for the stage, and they'd take care of your luggage in here. Castle Dome right there, that's the volcanic core. After the volcano blows up, what happens is the lava dome rises up, and everything that's soft or crummy erodes away, and you ended up with a unique plug. That's a unique geological feature. You can see that from Yuma, and it's been a great landmark for years, and everywhere you go in Yuma, it's a famous volcanic core. The mining is what started Yuma on the map, and then when people say it's just like they left, that's the ultimate compliment for me. When it's a ghost town, but it's still old and nothing's brand new, but you want to give people a tour back into how life was and what could have been and how it was and what thing was like, instead of everything is not brand new old.
If you want your own journey into the Wild West, visit Alan and Stephanie Armstrong in Castle Dome. It's only about 50 minutes on Highway 95 with a simple right at milepost 55. Call 928 920-3062 for hours and more information.
The Imperial Sand Dunes Plank Road turns 100. Built in 1915 to connect Yuma, Arizona to Holtville, California, the road was a result of a race between Los Angeles and San Diego. A replacement road was built in 1918 and replaced by an asphalt highway April 1st, 1926.
Hi, my name is Neil Hamada. I work for the Bureau of Land Management. I'm the Supervisory Outdoor Recreation Planner for the El Centro Field Office, and we have a great Discover the Desert event here today. We're celebrating the Plank Road Centennial. That means it's 100 years old, and on February 15th, the first bike was driven to create this unique crossing of the dunes. In order to get across, the first try was to build a road that kind of looked like railroad tracks out of wooden planks. That lasted about a year, and then in 1916 a second road was built, which is similar to the one that I'm standing on here with this great car brought to us by El Centro Motors, and we're here to celebrate the ingenuity and the determination of the people that built this road through this area about 100 years ago.
This is a really important event for the Bureau of Land Management, but more importantly, I think, for the American people. We have a piece of history that is 100 years old. If you take yourself back to the time before there were